got sued by teachers unions over this and everything else. And every time they complained and were screaming about this, it was always about what it was doing to them. And no one was talking about what it's doing to the kids. And they don't have their own union, just to be clear. So we need to have national school choice in this country. There's got to be access for everybody, no matter what, and everybody can access these funds.
So Congressman Riley Moore of West Virginia pushing for school choice right now, I think, is a very important thing to be discussing. And we're gonna talk with our next guest here about the Secretary of Education, Donald Trump's pick, Linda McMahon, and we're in a place right now where we're seeing transformation in the way the United States government functions, in the way we respect the taxpayer dollar, the way we give government back to the people. I don't know why we would expect anything less from our education system under this new administration, which is why we bring our friend Corey DeAngelis back on the show, senior fellow at the American Culture Project, adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. Corey, welcome back to the show. I love having these conversations with you. I'm very passionate about it, but I don't know anybody who's more passionate about it than you are, Corey.
Hey, Annie, thanks for having me. You
know, I reached out to you and I'd seen something that had been shared online. And I thought, you know what, I want to go straight to Corey with this. And having looked at it, I saw it had been shared 229,000 times on Facebook. 4,000 comments, 7,000 reactions. And it was just basically, I'm just going to read it to you, Corey, and we're going to go through this, and you're going to tell me whether this person has a point when it comes to the Department of Education or whether or not this is misguided. And it says, for all of you applauding President Trump and Elon Musk for tearing down the Department of Education, y'all need to go back to school or even do a simple search on the old interwebs because you have zero clue what the Department of Education actually does. And I really hope none of you have kids with IEPs or 504 plans because you're about to find out the really hard way just how much this department does to protect their education. Now, the first thing it lists as a reality check on what the Department of Education actually does is it said it protects students with disabilities, enforces IEPs, which is an individual education program, and 504 plans under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's IDEA, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Without this, schools would refuse accommodations to kids who seek them. Corey, I hear this the most. If we get rid of the Department of Education, what happens to these students with disabilities?
I mean, the person who posted this, I hope those 7,000 reacts are all laugh emojis because they don't know what they're talking about. And for them to scold the rest of us and act like they're so much more intelligent than the rest of the population who wants to abolish the department when they haven't even read the bill themselves is beyond parody. But if they were to read the bill, they'd understand that. And the bill's by Senator Mike Rounds, a Republican out of South Dakota. It's called Returning Education to the States Act. It doesn't really change a lot of these things that are listed in this post, but it does block grant the money back to the states based on the amount of students that you have in your particular state. So on the question of students with special needs, all of those programs would move under the Department of Health and Human Services. So that doesn't just go away. None of this funding goes away. If anything, it provides more education funding because you're wasting less of it on useless bureaucrats in D.C. thousands of miles away. They currently employ about 4,400 useless bureaucrats in D.C. under the Department of Education. That funding would go back to the states through the Department of Treasury in the form of block grants. So I live in Texas, for example. We have 10% of the nation's K-12 kids. We'd get about 10% of the funding. And so you'd have more local control. That funding would go back to the states to spend on education as they see fit. So a lot of these points that are in the post, civil rights protections for students, that moves under the Department of Justice. If you're really concerned about Pell Grants for college or student loans, that moves under the Department of Treasury as well. We can talk separately, Annie, about whether we should have the federal government involved in the student loan business. I don't think they should be. But the specific bill that's on the table that has any legitimate chance of passing that people are rallying behind is this one from Mike Rounds, which literally sends education back to the states. So and any useful programs that are currently under the Department of Education would move elsewhere.
So the vacating of the Department of Education at a federal level, there's a plan and process for these IEPs, the 504s, the IDEA or the IDEA Act or whatever it is. There's the other points here, and you kind of address some of these. Ensures
And by the way,
Sure.
does that currently lead to great academic and other outcomes for kids with special needs? No, it's a form of box checking currently. So we should look into that to make them
Yes.
even better. But just because you're in a school that's regulated by the federal government right now that says you have to do a good job for kids with special needs, they're not doing that right now. And so we should make sure we look at the implementation of these programs as they currently are, as opposed to this perfect idea of how they ought to work. They don't really work out in practice as well as the defenders of the status quo would like you to believe. But the reality is these would move under the Department of Health and Human Services.
We're speaking with Corey DeAngelis, a fierce fighter for school choice and for better outcomes, successful outcomes for our students in an education system right now that's failing them. One of the things that the consistent threads that I noticed in this post, just the short versions of the bullet points, are ensures equal access to education and talks about enforcing Title IX. It goes on to talk about providing federal education funding, sending billions to public schools, Title I schools, which are low-income students, special education programs, Pell Grants for college students, which you addressed, oversees federal student loans. That system's just fantastic. Holds schools accountable. Now, that one caught my eye, and I'm like, that's a good thing. Holds schools accountable because we have a suffering education system. Our students are not performing the way they should. Hold schools accountable. And then when I read the description here from this Kim Dixon post on Facebook that's been shared 229,000 times, this is what they want to attach to holding schools accountable. Investigates discrimination, ensures civil rights laws are followed, and prevents fraud in higher education. Where are the results of the education, the failing schools? What about holding those schools accountable?
They're not holding anything accountable. And if you look at the Department of Education, it started in 1979 as a payoff by Jimmy Carter to the teachers union. He wanted the NEA's endorsement. And it was created in part, one of their goals was to eliminate achievement gaps. Has that happened? No, they've gotten worse. Academic outcomes haven't gotten better. They've actually declined. And we've spent about $2 trillion since the inception at the federal level alone. And that doesn't even get into the point that this federal department is unconstitutional. The word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. It's therefore a violation of the 10th Amendment. And all of these things that are theorized that this department's supposed to do, like hold schools accountable. We already have departments of education in every single state. They can hold their schools accountable better than the federal government. And if you look at even the things that Trump's trying to do with his executive orders, like banning indoctrination in schools, I think that's a step in the right direction. But you can tell that they don't have any intention on listening to Trump. And maybe he wins this battle in the end, but it might take a long time. And it's very difficult from the federal level, these things that go on behind closed doors. Here's an example. I live in Texas, and we actually have things going on pretty well when it comes to our state government. And we banned DEI and we banned critical race theory in public schools. Guess what? They're still doing it. And we've caught them on camera. Accuracy in Media is an organization that does undercover journalism. And we went into public schools talking to their administrators all across the state. And we asked, are you going to listen to Abbott's order to not teach CRT? And they'll say, oh no, we're just gonna, don't worry about it. We'll just move the goalpost. We'll call it social emotional learning. And we're gonna, at the end of the day, the teachers are gonna do what they want. That's why I think school choice is so important. We should try to tweak the system from the top down and do what we can to make things better. But the ultimate form of accountability is from the bottom up. People need to be able to vote with their feet so that when they go to the school board and they complain, they won't get their mic cut off anymore. They won't be called a domestic terrorist anymore. They won't be labeled as an evil person, just being a parent who cares about their kids. They'll actually have a school board that says, hold up, I should listen to this person because they can actually do something about it now. They have the power to vote with their feet.
Yeah, I'm always amused at the fact that, like, if school choice exists, people could still choose the public education system. If it's not like that becomes a non-factor for our society to be able to invest in what they've got right now. They could continue to choose it, and you would think it would be better.
If you like your public school, you can keep your public school.
Yes, amen.
For real
to
this
that.
time, unlike with your doctor and Obama's lies.
You know, and you talk
Public
about
schools actually do get better too with competition.
exactly. They'd have an incentive to. You talk about bringing that education system even more local because the things that this post is saying that the Department of Education provides would go to other departments and back to the states. That makes it more local, and you're saying the states can hold the education system more accountable, but the natural part of what you're saying is that constituents, taxpayers, parents in those states can hold their state representatives more accountable quicker than they can potentially hold the Department of Education, a federal entity, accountable for failing schools.
Yeah, exactly. The most local form of accountability is foot voting. The family unit is the most local level of control that we have, the most local level of governance that we have, and the best form because they know their kids best. They have the best incentive to get the decisions right about their kids' education, and it works. It works like this in every other industry too. If we don't like what we're getting with higher education or pre-K, we can vote with our feet somewhere else. We don't like the grocery store we're at, we can go somewhere else. We don't have to go argue to a grocery store board as to why they should listen to us. By the way, they would just say they'd have empty shelves and they'd tell us, well, just give us more money and we'll do better, and then nothing would ever change. And that's what we have with the public school system.
Amen to that. We're speaking with Corey DeAngelis. I want to shift to the other half of this post. Like I said, 229,000 shares on Facebook. So once it gets put into like the union groups, then they all share it, and then it gets out there, and then people are like, well, this kind of makes a good point, but it's not really well informed. When you and I discussed this before, and I read this part, I told you this post is actually making me more in favor of getting rid of the Department of Education because it says, I'm going to read to you just briefly here. What does the Department of Education not do? So this post, an advocate for keeping the Department of Education, wants to highlight some of the things that might be misconceptions about what the Department of Education does. They say it doesn't do this. It says it does not control what your kids learn. State and local school boards decide curriculum, textbooks, and what's taught in history or science class. Doesn't enforce any particular agenda on schools. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we don't need the Department of Education for that purpose. Does not run public schools. They're managed by the states and local districts. So if they're doing that already, why do we need the Department of Education?
Exactly.
Does not hire or fire teachers. Does not mandate Common Core. Does not regulate private schools. And does not set tuition prices for college. Public universities are funded by state governments, and they set their own tuition. So at the end of this post, I'm thinking to myself,
so what's the big deal? What's so wrong with getting rid of it?
Why do we need it? I mean, what do you say to those points, these people? And, Corey, you and I both know there's a lot of good people who are in the education system who are being fed things repeatedly, and they don't quite understand how scary it wouldn't be if the Department of Education.
It's like they set up an entire form of a straw man argument to try to argue why we shouldn't abolish it, but no one's really, debating these issues when they're talking about abolishing the department. They're talking about constitutionality. They're talking about they're talking about moving these functions to other areas. Anybody that's serious that's talking about eliminating the department. And hopefully Linda McMahon gets confirmed on the floor. I think she will. She passed out a committee. I think it was like a 15-14 vote. All the Republicans voted in favor. I expect they'll do the same thing in the Senate floor vote. So hopefully she gets in there and body slams that unconstitutional department once and for all.
Yeah.
There is a problem with having to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. So hopefully if she can't kill it altogether, she can give it death by 1,000 cuts by trying to reduce the influence of the Department of Education. But you're right. If they aren't doing a lot already, what's the big deal? Why are they pulling their, it's all because it's Trump derangement syndrome on the left. They know Trump wants to do this. They know Republicans are in control, and all they can do is flail their arms and fearmonger and attack anything that's a good idea from the right. But the thing is, they create this basically a straw man, this thing that they're not actually arguing for to fight against, because they can't fight against the actual policy. Look at the bill, Returning Education to the States Act. It's not that crazy. It's not crazy at all. What's crazy is that we funnel billions of dollars to this federal department, which funds DEI programs in some cases, and doesn't really educate a single kid. What's crazy is that we don't give the money back to the states. So it's not as like seismic of a shift as the left wants you to think. And in fact, Randy Weingarten, I'm sure people on this show know Randy Weingarten as the least liked union boss in our country's history. She's the teachers union president who lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools. She was just on MSNBC recently, basically saying that the federal government shouldn't run our schools. States and localities should run the schools. And it's like, oh, well, you're making an argument for abolishing the department. And when pressed on the issue of abolishing the department, she said something along the lines of her members, quote unquote, don't really care whether there's a federal department or not. Okay, if you don't really care, then if Randy's not even concerned about it, maybe it's not that big of a deal. She went on to say, they're just concerned about the money. They really just want to make sure the money's still there. Okay, well, that's what the bill does. It sends the money back to the states. You'll have more money for K-12 education since you're not wasting it in DC.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we can get some Democrats to vote for it, but I don't know because of the Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah. Corey DeAngelis, we appreciate you. I mean, I'll tell you this. When I'm looking through these very viral things, Facebook is usually the right platform where the majority of these things are being shared. They don't really talk about the kids. And they don't really talk about the standards of education. It's really more about preserving the status quo. And I think to me that is the biggest indicator as to let's totally remake this system and start with the kids and start with the education. Pay great teachers, great salaries, get rid of the bad ones, and go from there. And Corey, you're a leader on this, so we always love having your voice.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Now, we'll say Idaho just signed a universal school choice bill, becoming state number 14. My home state of Texas has 76 co-sponsors on our House bill to go all into. So the red states are doing the right thing to empower parents. Blue states need to get along with the program too.
Yeah, I would second that. Corey DeAngelis, thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. That's a really interesting conversation. I see that post. When I saw that post on there, I was like, gosh, I'm going to have Corey. I had a private conversation with him on Twitter, and I was like, what do you think of this? Is this crazy? And then when I got through the whole thing reading it myself, I'm like, they just convinced me that we don't need the Department of Education because you're telling me all the things they don't do. Done. Deal. Let's go. Get rid of it. Fund it at the state level. And then we can, locally, on a state level, change out our politicians who are investing more in themselves and the structure and the system, the bureaucracy that exists to uphold people in positions that aren't making our kids learn what they need to do and read at the proper grade level and do math so that they can be independent, self-sufficient citizens one day. That's what it should be all about. If the bottom line isn't that, then we need a new bottom line.